He wore the badge with honor, carried a gun with pride, and promised to serve and protect. But behind that uniform was a man living a dangerous lie. Detective Daniel Cross wasn't just any officer. He was one of the best, commended for bravery, respected by his peers, and feared by criminals. But when the sun went down, Daniel became something else entirely, the very thing he was sworn to destroy. He stole drugs from police raids, sold them back to the same streets he once cleaned, and used his authority to silence anyone who stood in his way. He wasn't chasing criminals anymore. He was competing with them. For years, he lived two lives, one of justice and one of corruption. But when a young rookie started asking too many questions, Daniel's entire empire began to crumble. This is not just a story about a bad cop. It's a story about greed, power, and how far one man will go to hide the truth. Because sometimes, the most dangerous criminals are the ones wearing the badge. The line between good and evil is thinner than most people think. Every day, police officers face temptation, money, power, and the lure of the criminal world they're meant to fight. Some walk away, but others step across that line, believing they can control both sides. Detective Daniel Cross was one of them. To the world, he was a hero, a clean-cut, respected officer who led major drug operations and risked his life for justice. He shook hands with city leaders, received medals, and became the face of law enforcement. But behind closed doors, Daniel's reality was far darker. It began with a small decision, a single bag of cocaine that disappeared from an evidence locker. A mistake no one noticed. But once he tasted the power that came with it, he wanted more. Using his inside knowledge, Daniel built a network of criminals who worked under his command. He knew when raids would happen, who would be targeted, and how to stay one step ahead. For years, he lived two lives, the respected detective by day and the ruthless supplier by night. But no secret lasts forever. When a young rookie officer began connecting the dots, Daniel's empire started to unravel, leading to betrayal, exposure, and the ultimate downfall of a man who once wore the badge of honor. Because when justice turns corrupt, the truth always finds a way to rise. From the moment Daniel Cross joined the police academy, he was everything the department wanted in a cop: disciplined, intelligent, and deeply committed to justice. Raised in a small working-class town, Daniel idolized his father, a retired army officer who taught him that honor was worth more than gold. To everyone around him, Daniel was the perfect example of integrity, the kind of man who'd rather lose everything than break the law. He graduated top of his class, quickly earning a position in the city's narcotics division. Within months, he made his mark. His sharp instincts and fearlessness during raids gained him instant respect from both colleagues and superiors. He had a spotless record, a wife who adored him, and a growing reputation as the man who could take down any drug dealer in the city. But beneath that perfect image, something was starting to change. Daniel saw what most people didn't: the reality behind the badge. He saw drug lords walking free because of lawyers, corrupt judges, and political deals. He saw criminals living lavishly while officers risked their lives for modest pay. Slowly, that sense of justice began to erode, replaced by envy and quiet resentment. His breaking point came during a massive cocaine raid. The operation was flawless. Daniel led the team that seized over $1 million worth of drugs. Everyone celebrated the success, but as Daniel looked over the mountain of white powder and cash, something clicked in his mind. All that money, and not a cent would go to the people who put their lives on the line to earn it. That night, as the others loaded evidence into storage, Daniel made a decision that would change his life forever. He slipped one small package of cocaine into his pocket, not for use, but for profit. It was impulsive, reckless, but thrilling. His heart raced as he drove home, expecting alarms to blare, expecting someone to stop him. But nothing happened. No one noticed. No one ever would. The next morning, Daniel went to work as if nothing had changed. But everything had. That single act planted the seed of corruption, and it grew quickly. He sold that first package through an old street informant, earning more in one night than he did in an entire month of police work. At first, guilt gnawed at him. He told himself it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment. But the taste of easy money was intoxicating. Each new raid became an opportunity. Each arrest, a cover for something bigger. Daniel started moving carefully, logging false reports, altering timestamps, and manipulating evidence logs so no one could trace missing items back to him. Within months, he had built a quiet side business. A few grams here, a few $1,000s there. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone, that the system was already broken, that he was just taking what he deserved. Colleagues still saw him as a hero, the man who led from the front and brought justice to the streets. They had no idea that the same man giving press interviews about cleaning up the city was secretly feeding the very monster he claimed to fight. The uniform, once a symbol of duty, had become his disguise. Daniel Cross was no longer just a cop. He was the first piece in a dangerous puzzle, a man who believed he could serve two masters, the law and his own greed. And as history has shown, that balance never lasts for long. Daniel Cross had tasted the forbidden fruit, and it was sweeter than he ever imagined. What began as one stolen package soon became a pattern. Each raid presented another opportunity, another risk worth taking. But Daniel wasn't reckless. He was methodical. Every theft was small enough to go unnoticed, every sale carefully managed through people he could control. His first recruit was Rico Sanchez, a street-level dealer Daniel had arrested years earlier. Rico was smart, ruthless, and most importantly, scared. Daniel offered him a deal: freedom in exchange for loyalty. Rico became his eyes and ears in the underworld, distributing small amounts of confiscated drugs while keeping Daniel's name far from the streets. Over time, their operation grew. Daniel began using police intelligence to eliminate competition. When he learned about upcoming raids, he'd warn his dealers to clear out, then lead the same raid himself, seizing drugs from rivals and reselling them through his own network. He wasn't just breaking the law anymore, he was manipulating it. Money began pouring in faster than he could hide it. He bought a new car, paid off his debts, and even invested in a local bar, a perfect front for laundering cash. To his colleagues, Daniel was simply doing well. No one questioned the man with the clean record and the medal of valor pinned to his chest. But with success came arrogance. Daniel expanded his reach, taking control of multiple districts. His suppliers were low-level criminals who feared him, and his distributors were ex-convicts desperate for a second chance. Everyone worked for him, whether they knew it or not. In the underworld, he became a myth, a nameless, faceless supplier known only as the Ghost. By day, he led anti-narcotics operations. By night, he ran the very drug trade he claimed to be dismantling. It was a perfect system, a cycle of deceit that kept him untouchable. But perfection breeds paranoia. To maintain control, Daniel started keeping detailed records of every deal, every payoff, every name. He stored it all on an encrypted flash drive hidden behind his office wall. Insurance, in case someone tried to cross him. Meanwhile, the department's internal affairs division began noticing patterns. Inconsistencies in evidence reports, missing quantities from storage, and unusually high failure rates in Daniel's recent operations. They didn't have proof yet, but suspicions were growing. Daniel responded by tightening his circle. He replaced dealers, bribed officers, and even used his badge to intimidate anyone who questioned him. His power had reached its peak, but it was also becoming impossible to hide. Rico, his most trusted ally, started slipping. The pressure of double dealing between police and street gangs began breaking him. He started using again, losing focus and drawing attention. During one late-night deal gone wrong, Rico was arrested by an undercover task force from another district. When Daniel heard the news, panic set in. He had always believed he could control everyone around him, but now his operation depended on a man sitting in an interrogation room, a man who knew everything. Daniel acted quickly. Using his influence, he pulled strings to transfer Rico's case, destroyed paperwork, and fabricated reports to make the arrest disappear. It worked, for now. But it also drew attention from higher up. The ghost had become too powerful, too untouchable. And in the world of crime, when someone rises that high, there's always someone waiting to bring them down. The walls were closing in, and Daniel Cross didn't even realize that his empire was already cracking from the inside. Daniel Cross's empire had grown beyond anything he'd ever imagined. He controlled entire drug routes, manipulated case files, and bought silence with cash. To the city, he was still a hero, the detective who made crime rates drop. But behind the curtain, Daniel was unraveling. Sleep became rare. Every siren made him flinch. Every knock on the door filled him with dread. He had built his empire on lies, and now he had to lie to protect it. He began isolating himself from friends and family, convincing himself that everyone was a threat. His wife, Emily, noticed the changes: late nights, secret phone calls, and stacks of money hidden in strange places. But every time she questioned him, Daniel brushed it off. "It's just the job," he'd say. At work, his paranoia deepened. He began checking his colleagues' desks, listening to their conversations, even bugging squad cars to monitor what they said about him. His once friendly demeanor had vanished, replaced by aggression and mistrust. Some officers whispered that Daniel wasn't the same man they once knew. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs had quietly reopened the case they'd shelved months earlier. The data pointed to corruption within the narcotics division, and the name Daniel Cross kept appearing on reports that didn't add up. But they needed proof. Hard evidence. Then came a new recruit, Officer Laura Jensen. Bright, determined, and deeply idealistic, she looked up to Daniel as a role model. Assigned under his supervision, Laura admired his leadership and experience. But the more she learned, the more she began to notice the small inconsistencies others ignored. Evidence logs didn't match. Confiscated drugs disappeared without explanation. Reports were signed off too quickly, and the timing of Daniel's raids always seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Laura's instincts told her something was wrong. She started staying late, reviewing files Daniel had signed off on. She compared arrest records with evidence reports, and patterns began to emerge. Drugs from Daniel's raids were vanishing before they ever reached the evidence room. One evening, Laura followed him after work. She trailed his car through back streets until he stopped behind an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place she'd only seen in drug cases. From a distance, she watched as Daniel met with a man she recognized from their criminal database, Rico Sanchez. The two exchanged a briefcase. Laura took photos, her hands shaking as she realized what she was witnessing. The next day, she didn't know what to do. Daniel wasn't just her superior. He was one of the most respected men in the department. Accusing him without solid proof could destroy her career. Or worse. Still, she couldn't ignore what she saw. She began collecting small pieces of evidence, copied reports, timestamps, and photos, building a quiet case against her own mentor. But Daniel sensed it. He could feel her watching him. Her questions were sharper, her eyes harder to fool. One evening, he caught her in his office going through files. She froze. Daniel smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Looking for something?" he asked. Laura mumbled an excuse and left. But both knew the game had changed. From that moment, Daniel made it his mission to protect himself, by any means necessary. He deleted files, transferred money, and even threatened informants to stay silent. But it was too late. Laura Jensen had seen the cracks in his badge. and she wasn't going to stop until the truth was exposed. Laura Jensen couldn't sleep. The image of her mentor, Detective Daniel Cross, shaking hands with a known drug dealer haunted her every night. She knew what it meant, but she also knew what it could cost her. Exposing a senior detective wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. But Laura wasn't the kind of cop who could look the other way. She started working in silence. Every night, after everyone had gone home, she'd stay late in the precinct, gathering evidence. She cross-checked financial records, case reports, and surveillance logs. Slowly, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Evidence disappearing, cash unaccounted for, and drugs never reaching the evidence vault. Laura took everything she found to internal affairs. At first, they were hesitant. Daniel was one of their best, a decorated officer with friends in high places. But Laura's evidence was solid. Her photos from the warehouse meeting were undeniable. An internal investigation was launched under complete secrecy. Surveillance was placed on Daniel, his phone was tapped, and every movement was monitored. But Daniel wasn't stupid. He sensed the walls closing in long before they made their move. One afternoon, Daniel received a message from one of his street informants, a warning. Someone inside the department was feeding information to internal affairs. His heart sank. There was only one person close enough to notice his patterns: Laura. That night, he waited for her in the parking lot outside the station. When she approached her car, Daniel stepped out of the shadows. "We need to talk," he said calmly. His tone wasn't angry but cold, dangerously calm. Inside his car, the air was thick with tension. He told her he knew what she was doing. Laura didn't deny it. Instead, she slid a small recorder onto the dashboard and pressed play. His own voice from a phone call, discussing a deal. Daniel froze. Then, with a quiet smile, he said, "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." He offered her money first, then protection, then threats. But Laura didn't back down. She told him she'd already handed everything to internal affairs. For the first time in years, Daniel lost control. His calm broke, replaced by desperation. He realized there was no way out. The following morning, the department erupted in chaos. Warrants were issued, lockers searched, and Daniel Cross was officially under investigation. News of the probe spread fast. Within hours, every TV station carried the story. Top narcotics detective suspected of running drug operation. The same man who'd once been celebrated as a hero was now the center of a nationwide scandal. Officers who had idolized him refused to believe it, until the evidence started pouring in. Investigators found large sums of untraceable cash hidden in his home, offshore accounts linked to his name, and encrypted files detailing years of illegal transactions. The public was furious. The department's reputation shattered overnight. Protests erupted, demanding accountability. For Daniel, there was nowhere left to hide. During the interrogation, he sat silent, staring at the one-way mirror. Across the glass, Laura watched, a mix of fear and sadness in her eyes. She had brought down her mentor, the man she once admired more than anyone. When asked if he had anything to say, Daniel finally looked up and said, "You don't understand." I wasn't the only one. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the department. Was he covering his guilt or exposing something much bigger? Either way, Daniel Cross's double life was over. The truth was out, and it was uglier than anyone imagined. The courtroom was silent when Daniel Cross entered, wearing a plain orange jumpsuit instead of his polished uniform. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the man once hailed as a symbol of justice now stood accused of betraying everything he represented. The trial of Detective Daniel Cross became one of the most talked-about corruption cases in the country. Prosecutors described him as a master manipulator, a man who used the law to build a criminal empire. Over a dozen witnesses were brought in: former dealers, dirty cops, and even members of his own task force. Each testimony painted a darker picture of who Daniel really was. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records traced millions in illegal profits. Security footage linked him to underground deals. Hidden cash was found buried behind false walls in his home. Every secret he thought he'd buried was now exposed under the blinding light of justice. And then came Laura Jensen's testimony. Calm, precise, and fearless, she detailed how she uncovered his crimes, piece by piece. When the prosecutor asked why she risked her career to expose him, her answer was simple. Because the badge means nothing if it protects corruption. Her words silenced the courtroom. Daniel didn't look at her. He sat motionless, staring at the table, his jaw tight. During his defense, Daniel tried to shift the blame. He claimed he was part of a larger network, that other officers, even superiors, were involved. But without evidence, it sounded like a desperate attempt to save himself. The jury didn't buy it. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was delivered. Guilty on all counts: drug trafficking, corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The sentence: 35 years in federal prison. As the guards led him away, Daniel turned back once, his eyes cold, unreadable. For a moment, it was as if he wanted to speak, but then he simply nodded, as though accepting the fate he'd created for himself. Behind bars, Daniel's life became a twisted reflection of his past. The same criminals he'd once arrested now surrounded him. Some feared him, others wanted revenge. Word spread fast. The great detective Cross had fallen, stripped of his power, reduced to a number in a prison jumpsuit. Years later, a journalist was granted permission to interview him for a true crime series. Sitting across from the camera, older, thinner, and visibly broken, Daniel finally spoke about the life he'd lived. Greater than, "At first, I thought I could balance it, protect the city and profit from it. I thought I was smarter than the system. But the truth is, once you cross that line, you never come back." He admitted that greed had consumed him, that power had blinded him. He confessed that every lie, every dollar, every secret deal was just another step toward his own destruction. His final words were haunting. "I didn't just betray the law. I betrayed myself." The documentary ended with a shot of Daniel walking down the prison corridor, his figure fading into the darkness. His story became a warning, a grim reminder that corruption can hide behind the brightest badge, that even those sworn to protect can become the monsters they once hunted, because in the end, no one, not even the law, is immune to the temptation of power.